That Thanksgiving. The table went silent. The head chair was empty. I stood in the glass dining room, my hands still shaking from my stepmother's slap. They expected me to fold, but the door opened, and my grandfather walked in. He placed a thick envelope in front of me and whispered, "They touched my money, and they touched you." No one knew that empty chair was being held for a judgment. My name is Marin Hollis. I am 27 years old, and I was driving back home. Not home in the way you miss, but home in the way you brace for. Lakefield, Illinois. It is a town built on the bones of old money and sprayed with the veneer of the new. It is a place where the hedges are trimmed with rulers, where the silence of the wide, clean streets feels less like peace and more like a shared, unspoken judgment. A thin, perfect layer of snow had fallen, just enough to dust the cobblestone driveway and sparkle under the artfully placed landscape lighting. It was beautiful, in the sterile, airless way a magazine photo is beautiful. I parked my sensible sedan behind a gleaming new SUV I did not recognize and walked toward the house I grew up in, or more accurately, the house my father, Gregory Hollis, currently occupied. The main event was being held in the glass conservatory, a massive heated addition that jutted into the manicured backyard, looking like a snow globe of wealth. I was not here for a holiday gathering. I was here because I had been summoned. The heavy oak door opened before I could knock. Valerie, my stepmother. "Marin, darling, you made it." Her voice was smooth, cultured, and held the same ambient temperature as the November air. Valerie was the perfect hostess, a title she had fought for and defended with the ferocity of a warlord. Her blonde hair was swept into an intricate twist that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, and her eyes, sharp and assessing, did a rapid scan of my coat, my boots, my bag. I was cataloged, evaluated, and filed away in under 3 seconds. "Hello, Valerie? The house looks incredible." "It's just a simple family dinner," she lied, gliding away to adjust a floral arrangement that was already flawless. I stepped inside, the warmth and the scent of roasting turkey and something expensive and spiced hitting me like a wall. And there, lounging on a velvet ottoman like a young king, was Colt, my half-brother, 19 years old, the family's self-proclaimed, self-evident prodigy. He was wearing a cashmere sweater with a designer logo so large it was practically a billboard, and he offered me a lazy, entitled wave. His attitude was, as always, significantly larger than his accomplishments. "Hey, Marin. Finally," he said, not bothering to get up. "Hello, Colt. Happy Thanksgiving." My father emerged from his study, glass of whiskey in hand. Gregory Hollis, a businessman who had built a career on the shimmering illusion of success. Lately, that illusion was costing him. He was a man treading water, smiling broadly while his legs kicked frantically beneath the surface. The polite whispers around Lakefield were that his latest venture was cash poor, that he was leveraged to the hilt. "There she is," he boomed, pulling me into a hug that was more possession than affection. His grip was too tight on my arms. "Good, good, you're here." The air in this house was not just warm, it was thick. It was pressurized with the things unsaid. The rumor, which I knew from careful observation to be fact, was that my father desperately needed a cash injection to keep this very house from being remortgaged into oblivion. Valerie, a master of language, had a smoother term for it. "We're just reflowing the assets." I'd heard her tell an inquisitive neighbor on the phone, her voice like chilled steel. Part of that reflow was apparently sitting in the driveway under a silk tarp, waiting for its grand debut, a luxury sedan, already on deposit, intended as the headline gift for Colt's Thanksgiving, a mandatory offering to the family's golden boy. The entire family unit, Gregory, Valerie, and Colt, operated on the silent, bedrock assumption that the money for this car, for the mortgage, for the catering, for the illusion itself, would simply come from somewhere. For the last 8 years, somewhere had been my bank account. I knew exactly what tonight's agenda was, beyond turkey and pie. My phone had buzzed in my coat pocket as I'd pulled into the driveway, the cold air making the vibration feel more urgent, more sinister. It was from my father. "Remember your bank cards. We'll talk after dessert." Not "how are you, drive safe," or "so glad you could make it," just a directive, a reminder of my function. But this time was different. I had not come unprepared. I wasn't just bringing a socially acceptable bottle of wine and a smile stretched thin over my resentment. Tucked into the inner pocket of my leather satchel, the one that held my work laptop, was a simple, hardbound notebook. And inside that notebook, secured by a thick elastic band, were pristine, double-sided copies of encrypted emails, communications between my late grandfather's lawyer and myself. For the first time in my life, I had an exit hatch, an escape clause only I knew existed. "Everyone's in the conservatory," Valerie announced, herding me forward. "We're just waiting on the Aldens, and then we can begin." I walked into the glass room. It was breathtaking, in the way a beautiful, intricate trap is breathtaking. A long mahogany table stretched the length of the room, reflecting the dozens of flickering candles. It was set for 20. The crystal glasses glittered. The heavy heirloom silver gleamed. Valerie's touch was everywhere, in the towering centerpieces of white roses and dark foliage, in the perfectly folded linen napkins, in the tiny, exquisite calligraphed place cards. And there, at the head of the table opposite my father's seat, was the empty chair. It was his chair, my grandfather, Raymond Hollis. He had been gone for 3 years, but that chair had always been his. Valerie glided past me, touching the back of it lightly. "It's a touching tribute, isn't it?" she murmured, just loud enough for the nearest guests to hear. "To remember Raymond, he so loved a full house." She called it a tribute. I knew what it was. It was a strategic occupation, a way to fill the space of the only man in this family who had ever seen her clearly. A way to placate the older relatives while simultaneously reminding everyone who was now the true matriarch. The room was filling quickly. The supporting cast for the evening's drama had arrived. Assorted cousins and aunts, clutching their wine glasses, offering air kisses that smelled of expensive perfume and faint. Underlying anxiety. My father's business partners, their faces a little too ruddy from the whiskey, their laughter a little too loud. They were here to be reassured. They were here to see that the Hollis name was still solvent, that Gregory was still a man to be trusted with their investments. And then there were the powerful neighbors, the Aldens and the Winthrops, the kind of people who measured their worth in property lines and stock portfolios. They were all here to witness the grand performance, the anointing of Colt, the celebration of the bright, unbroken future of the Hollis family. I found my place card, Marin Hollis, tucked halfway down the table, precisely in the middle, nestled between a distant aunt and one of my father's nervous-looking partners. I was, as always, in the designated child slot, even at 27, even as an editor at Hearth and Hallow Media, a job I had secured and excelled at entirely on my own. I sat, the smooth wood of the chair cool against my back. I am an editor. I build narratives for a living. I see the seams. I know where the plot is thin, and I know how to craft a stronger ending, and I could see the entire narrative being built here tonight. I watched my father work the room, his voice booming, a fresh glass of absurdly expensive single malt in his hand. Whiskey, I knew. For a fact, he'd bought on a credit card that was screaming its limit. I saw the quick, uneasy looks exchanged between his partners when he turned his back. They weren't just celebratory glances. They were the looks of men waiting on a debt to be paid, wondering if their host was good for it. I registered every detail, my mind cataloging them like evidence, the specific vintage of the wine being poured, chosen not for its taste, but for its price tag, and the story it told. The heavy, engraved silver forks, polished to a painful brightness, the way Valerie subtly directed the catering team, a team she treated like her own personal staff, with tiny sharp flicks of her wrist, and a smile that never, ever reached her eyes. The chatter rose, a symphony of false pleasantries and brittle laughter, and no one, Not a single person in that glittering, candlelit room looked at me twice. Not really. They saw Marin Hollis, the quiet one, the reliable daughter, the easy one, the one who had always understood her role, to be the dependable, invisible support system for the real stars of the show, Gregory and his chosen heir. Colt. They saw a resource, a line of credit, a solution. They couldn't see the shift that had happened inside me over the last 6 months, a quiet hardening of resolve, a clicking into place of long-dormant anger. They couldn't feel the cold, hard certainty sitting in my stomach, a certainty that had grown with every secret, late-night phone call with Mr. Morrell, my grandfather's attorney. They didn't know that I had spent my nights studying trust law, highlighting clauses, and cross-referencing emails. They didn't know that the simple notebook in my bag contained a script, my script. The play was about to begin. They thought I was here to be the bank. I was here to be the auditor. The curtain was rising, and they had no idea I was the one who had written the final, devastating act. The glittering scene in the conservatory was just that, a scene, a carefully produced play. I knew, because I had been both a stagehand and an unwilling financial backer for this production my entire life. In the living room, just off the main hall, stood the shrine, a grand custom-built mahogany shelving unit. It was filled, top to bottom, with Colt's achievements, plastic soccer trophies from when he was 6, lacrosse plaques from his junior high team, a large, framed photo of him crossing a finish line, medal around his neck, face contorted in a triumphant grimace. Every inch of public-facing wall space was dedicated to the narrative of Colt, the successor, the victor. My room, upstairs and tucked away at the end of the hall, had its own wall. It was covered in honor roll certificates, spelling bee ribbons, and a framed letter from my university congratulating me on graduating summa cum laude. None of them had ever seen the living room. They were private accomplishments, not suitable for the family's public-facing brand. That brand was built on a simple, insidious motto, one my father deployed whenever he needed something: family helps family. It sounded so warm, so supportive. In our house, it was the preamble to a withdrawal. It was the silken cloth used to polish a gun before placing it to your temple. It meant, Marin pays. The first time was when I was 19, home from college for the summer. Colt, then a brand new high school freshman, had lost his phone, a top-of-the-line model, of course. Marin, honey, Gregory had said, sitting me down at the kitchen island, his voice radiating paternal concern. We're in a bit of a tight spot this month. Cash flow, you know how it is. But Colt needs his phone. For safety, for school. Family helps family, right? I'd just received a significant refund check from my university, leftover scholarship money I had meticulously saved. I nodded, because that's what I was trained to do. Of course, Dad. Great. His smile was instant, relieved. This is just a temporary advance, you understand. We'll have you paid back by the 1st of next month. The 1st of the month came and went. So did the next one, when I finally, nervously, asked about it. My father looked genuinely confused, as if I'd brought up a forgotten dream. Oh, that? Honey, don't be transactional. We're family. I never saw a dollar of that advance. It was the first of dozens. The word loan was never used again. It was always an advance, or a spot, or a little help. And I, the daughter with the scholarships, the part-time jobs, and the ingrained sense of duty, became the secret, unacknowledged pillar holding up the facade. Then, after my mother had been gone for several years, Valerie arrived. She didn't just enter our lives, she curated them. Her wedding to my father was an exercise in rebranding. She brought with her an ironclad aesthetic and a new set of rules, all delivered with the sweetest, most suffocating praise. Marin, you're so intelligent, she'd purr, touching my hair. You understand that appearances are everything in a town like Lakefield. What's good for the image is what's right for the family. And what's right always meant what was right for Colt. Valerie saw in him the perfect, moldable accessory to her new life. I was baggage, useful, perhaps, but still baggage from a previous, less polished administration. The holidays became a masterclass in this disparity. At Christmas, Colt would be presented with experiences, a 2-week ski trip to Aspen, a summer coding camp in California that cost 5 figures, a new set of custom-fitted golf clubs. My gifts were always practical. 1 year. It was a high-quality blender. For your new apartment, Valerie had smiled, as if I were a budding homemaker and not a literature major. Another year. It was a sensible, beige luggage set. Practical, yes, but screaming utility, while Colt's gifts screamed value. The breaking point, the moment the hairline fracture in my psyche split wide open, came the summer I was 21. I had been accepted into a prestigious writer's workshop, a 6-week intensive program. It was a long shot, and I'd gotten in. More than that, I'd been awarded a scholarship that covered half the tuition. I just needed the other half. It was about $2,000. I prepared a small, pathetic presentation with a printed budget and the acceptance letter. I found Gregory and Valerie in the study, reviewing blueprints for a new patio. I made my case. I spoke of my passion, of the career I wanted to build. I showed them the numbers, emphasizing that half was already paid. Gregory barely looked up from the plans. "Marin, that's nice, but it's just a little writing thing, isn't it? A hobby." "It's not a hobby. Dad, it's a major opportunity. Colt needs to go to the advanced baseball camp in Florida this summer," Valerie interjected, her voice final. She tapped a glossy brochure on the desk. "His coach says it's essential for his college prospects." "This is," I faltered, looking at my father. "Dad?" He sighed. "The put-upon patriarch. Marin, be realistic. Colt's camp is a real opportunity. It has a tangible return. This writing, it's a dream. We have to invest in the sure thing. Opportunity doesn't wait. We just can't swing both." And that was it. My opportunity was a dream. His was an investment. I stood there, my papers trembling in my hand. I did not cry. I simply nodded, folded my letter, and walked out. The next day, I went to a different bank, one my family did not use. I opened a new checking account and a high-yield savings account, all under my name, linked to my email, with statements sent to a new post office box. I took on 2 new freelance editing clients, working from midnight to 3 in the morning after my classes and my regular library job. I learned to use encrypted transfers. I learned to move money in ways no one could trace. I learned to lie, with a smile, about how much I had. I never asked them for a single cent again. My independence was misinterpreted. They saw it as maturity, as me finally understanding my place. My father, in a moment of rare, whiskey-fueled candor, gave me his version of a life lesson. "You're a smart girl, Marin," he'd said, patting my shoulder at some family barbecue. "And a smart woman knows that the best thing she can be is agreeable, obedient. It makes life so much easier for everyone." "For you," I thought, but I just smiled. Valerie had her own method of control, the praise and squeeze. It was a 2-step maneuver of emotional manipulation. "Marin, you are so wonderfully thoughtful," she'd begin, finding me in the kitchen, and I'd brace for it. "You always know what needs to be done." Step 1, the praise. And here came step 2, the squeeze. "Which is why I know you won't mind handling all the dishes tonight. And could you also organize the pantry? Colt has his big midterm to study for, and your father and I have that fundraiser. You're a lifesaver." A lifesaver who was now, by default, the unpaid help, all while being told I was a thoughtful person for it. To refuse would make me unthoughtful, unhelpful. It was brilliant. It was suffocating. And Colt absorbed these lessons like a sponge. He learned, through their constant, unspoken reinforcement, that the world was divided into 2 groups, him and the people who existed to facilitate his life. I was firmly in the latter category. He would leave a trail of muddy cleats through the house, yelling, "Marin, clean this up. Mom said you're not busy." And when I'd object, my father would step in. "Don't make a fuss, Marin. Just do it. He's got practice." No one ever corrected him. No one ever told him no. He grew into his 19th year believing that please was optional and thank you was unnecessary. For a long time, the silence I retreated into was a shield. It was the only place I was safe. It was hurt. It was submission. Then, one day, it changed. I don't remember the exact date, but I remember the feeling. The advance this time was for Colt's car insurance, a ridiculous sum after he'd been in 2 accidents that were quietly settled out of court. The text from my father was blunt. "Need $4,000 by Friday for Colt's premium. Send it." Not a request, a directive. I looked at the text. I looked at my bank account. The one they didn't know about. The one I had built with 4 years of sleepless nights and relentless work. And I felt, for the first time, not a flicker of pain, but a cold, clean blade of anger. I did not delete the message. I screenshotted it. I saved it to a cloud server. I created a folder. I titled it Evidence. My silence was no longer a shield. It had become a forge. It was the incubation period for a plan I hadn't even consciously formed yet. I started looking, really looking. I paid attention to the mail left on the hall table. I began taking pictures of strange letters, loan documents with letterheads I didn't recognize, past due notices tucked under magazines. I saved Valerie's texts, the ones that dripped with sweet manipulation. I recorded the dates of every advance I had been forced to pay, cross-referencing them with my old bank statements. I became a meticulous, silent archivist of my own exploitation. They all mistook this silence. They saw it as acceptance. They thought I was the same dutiful daughter, the same emotional doormat they had always relied on. They thought I had forgotten the slights, the dismissals, the thousands of dollars, the writing workshop, the blender, the endless, grinding prioritization of a spoiled boy over a capable woman. They thought I forgot. As I sat at that Thanksgiving table, the brilliant, blinding light of the candles reflecting in my water glass, I ran a thumb over the edge of my notebook in my lap. They had no idea. I had not forgotten a single thing. I remembered, with perfect, photographic clarity, every last receipt. My grandfather, Raymond Hollis, was a man of profound, deliberate silence, while my father, Gregory, built his life on loud projections and glittering facades. My grandfather built an empire in the quiet spaces. He was a private investor, a man who moved significant weight in markets my father did not even understand. His personal motto, which he had shared with me once when I was 12 and complaining about being overlooked, was simple. See what others miss. Marin, the real value is never in the thing everyone is shouting about. 3 years ago, he had passed away. My father and Valerie held a funereal performance worthy of a statesman. They wept, they accepted condolences, they spoke of his legacy, and then they moved on, occupying his memory just as Valerie had occupied his chair at the head of the table. What they never mentioned, what I am certain they either never knew or chose to criminally forget, was what he left for me 6 months ago. An email had arrived in my inbox. It was not my work email, nor my personal one. It was an old, dormant account I had created in college, one I had only given to him. The subject line was a simple string of numbers. The sender was an address I did not recognize. D. Morel, Esca. The email was encrypted. It took me 2 days and a specialized privacy browser to open it. When I did, my world tilted on its axis. It was from a man named Dax Morel, a lawyer and the independent supervisor of something called the Raymond Hollis Descendant Trust, a trust established by my grandfather, funded 5 years before his death, with a single beneficiary, me. It was not a small trust. It was a life-altering, generational transfer of wealth. It was freedom, liquefied and sitting in a vault. But it was locked. My grandfather, ever the strategist, had set the disbursement date for my 35th birthday. I was 27. I stared at the screen for an hour, my heart hammering. It was a mirage, a cruel joke, a rescue boat 10 miles offshore. Then I read the addendums. Dax Morrell, in precise, unemotional language, guided me to a specific subsection. It was titled, in sterile legal font, Clause 4.1b, the Hardship and Coercion Clause. My grandfather had seen it all. The clause was his voice, translated into law. It stipulated that the full, unmitigated control of the trust could be transferred to the beneficiary, me, at any time prior to the designated age, should specific conditions be met. These conditions included undue financial pressure, emotional coercion, or physical threats applied by any party, related or unrelated, in an attempt to extract funds, signatures, or leverage against the beneficiary's assets. It was a key, crafted specifically for the lock my family had built around me. The trust was managed by a corporate entity, Northbridge Fiduciary, a fictional, faceless name that meant no. They were the wall, but Dax Morrell was the gatekeeper. He was the independent supervisor, the human element, empowered by my grandfather to execute the clause. His encrypted email was not just an introduction, it was a manual. It contained instructions that I followed to the letter, my hands shaking as I worked late into the night. First, the protocols. He instructed me to set up new, layered accounts, to enable two-factor authentication on everything, using an authenticator app, not text messages, which he noted could be spoofed or ported. He gave me an index of terms to use. Activate emergency protocol was the trigger phrase. It was to be used only when the coercion was active and provable. I spoke to Dax Morrell on the phone only once, on a newly purchased, prepaid burner SIM card. His voice was dry, professional, and held an undercurrent of something that sounded like patience. He was, I realized, an executor who had been waiting for this call. He also sent me an audio file. It was a digitized microcassette recording. I pressed play, and my grandfather's voice, dry and warm and smelling of the pipe tobacco he used to smoke, filled my small apartment. "Marin," he said, and I choked, my hand flying to my mouth. "This is for you. They will tell you that money is for security, that it is for status, that it is for comfort. They are wrong. That money is for one thing, to buy your freedom. It is not a gift to make your life easy. It is a tool to make your life your own. Do not let them buy your silence with it. Let it buy your voice." I wept. I wept for the first time in years. A deep, shuddering grief that was equal parts loss and overwhelming, crushing gratitude. He had seen me. When I was just a quiet girl being steamrolled by my father and his new, shiny wife, Raymond Hollis had seen me, and he had laid down an escape route. The next day, I began my work. The grief receded, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. I was no longer a victim, I was a strategist. First, I needed a destination for the funds. As per Morrell's instructions, I opened a new shadow account with a completely different, uninvolved national bank. I did it online, using my new P.O. box, routed through a VPN. This account would be the landing pad, the place the money would go the moment the hardship clause was triggered. It was clean, untraceable by my family, and ready. Next, I mapped the risk. My entire life had been a risk assessment, but this was different. This was formal. If Gregory or Valerie even suspected the existence of this trust, the pressure would become unbearable. They would not just ask, they would demand, threaten, manipulate, and litigate. They would tear me apart to get to it. I had to prepare for that. Dax Morrell had been clear. The clause required proof of coercion. My word was not enough. This led to the legal preparations. I drafted a durable power of attorney, one that specifically named Dax Morrell and Northbridge Fiduciary as my agents. But only in the event of my incapacitation. The document was clear. No other party. Specifically naming Gregory Hollis and Valerie Hollis had any right to make financial or medical decisions on my behalf. It was a preemptive strike. I had the document notarized and sent a hard copy to Morell's office. It would only become effective upon my final, physical signature on a corresponding activation document. No one could sign for me. No one could claim I was unstable and take control. My new life became one of paranoia and compartments. Morell. Understanding the volatile nature of my family had provided a resource, an email for an anonymous community support group that specialized in high-net-worth familial abuse and financial control. They were not therapists. They were tacticians. They sent me checklists, safety checklists, digital security checklists, how to create a go bag with spare cash, a change of clothes, and a hard copy of my essential documents, how to check my car for tracking devices, how to vary my routine. It felt like something out of a spy novel, but as I read their advice, I recognized every single pattern of control they described. I bought the new SIM card. I began compartmentalizing my data. The evidence folder was moved to a new, encrypted cloud server, one that required a 24-word passkey that existed only in my memory. My most important preparation was the dead man's switch. I drafted an email to Dax Morell. The subject line was the emergency activation code. The body of the email contained a link to the cloud server holding my evidence folder, the screenshots of my father's demands, the audio recordings I had begun to take, the photographs of the hidden loan documents. I scheduled that email to send, automatically, at a specific time, 9:00 p.m. tonight, Thanksgiving night. If I was safe and in control, I would log in before 9 and cancel the scheduled send. But if I was coerced, if they took my phone, if they trapped me, if I could not access my account, that email would send. It would trigger the clause. It would deliver the proof. It would be my accidental leak, my final fail-safe. I sat at that glittering Thanksgiving table, the sound of polite, false laughter washing over me. I felt the weight of my father's text in my pocket. Remember your bank cards. We'll talk after dessert. He was planning his move. He thought he was the chess player, and I was a pawn to be sacrificed. He had no idea that I had been studying the board for 6 months. He had no idea that my grandfather had already placed my hand on the queen. I understood, with a clarity that cut through the candlelight, what tonight was. This was not a family dinner. This was a deposition. The final confrontation would not be a screaming match in a hallway. It would happen right here, in this glass box, in front of their friends, their partners, their peers. I would let them build their case. I would let them walk right into the trap my grandfather and I had set for them. And when they made their move, I would not be the one speaking. The law would... The appetizers were being served. Tiny, exquisite constructions of fig and prosciutto, carried on silver trays. The murmur of conversation was light, celebratory. My father was laughing at something one of his partners said. Valerie was a vision of effortless grace, touching a shoulder here, offering a warm, knowing smile there. She found me as I was pretending to admire a painting in the hallway. Marin, darling, a quick word? Her voice was a silken thread, pulling me away from the small cluster of guests. She did not wait for an answer, simply glided toward the butler's pantry, a small, quiet space between the kitchen and the dining room. She expected me to follow. I did. She closed the door, not all the way, but enough. The sounds of the party dimmed to a background hum. She turned, her smile still perfectly in place, but her eyes were all business. "It's such a relief you're here," she began, her conditional kindness voice in full effect. "You know, we're doing that little reflow of the assets to secure the house and, well, everything." She reached into a drawer, beside the polished silver, and pulled out a single, neatly folded document and a heavy, expensive-looking pen. "It's just a formality," she said, unfolding it on the marble counter. "A goodwill authorization. It's just a little paper that tells the bank we are all, as a family, 100% aligned. It lets your father manage our shared interests." She pushed it toward me, holding the pen out, If you could just sign at the bottom, we can get this out of the way before the turkey. My blood went cold. This was it. I am an editor by trade. I read for a living. I see the subtext in every line. I picked up the document. My hand was perfectly steady. It was not a goodwill authorization. It was a trap, rendered in dense, impenetrable legalese. I scanned the paragraphs, my eyes jumping to the key phrases I had been trained by Dax's documents to find. On behalf of fiduciary proxy, unmitigated access, management of all assets, specified and unspecified, inherited or otherwise acquired. They were not trying to refinance the house. They were trying to get their hands on my trust. They must have suspected or learned something of its existence. This document would give my father complete power of attorney over my finances. It was a key, a blank check, a surrender. "Valerie," I said, my voice even, "this seems far more than a formality. This is a comprehensive power of attorney." Her smile faltered, just a fraction of an inch. "Marin, don't be dramatic. It's just to show a united front. It's for the house." "The house isn't my asset," I said, placing the document back on the counter. "And this language gives my father control of, well, everything." The door pushed open. Gregory. He had been waiting. He entered, filling the small space with the scent of whiskey and his sheer physical presence. He put a heavy proprietary hand on my shoulder. "What's the trouble, ladies?" he asked, his voice a low, rational rumble. He looked at the paper, then at me, his expression one of profound, disappointed paternalism. "Marin," he sighed, "I know these legal papers look intimidating to you. You're young. You're a creative person, not a numbers person. It's easy to get confused by the language." He was patronizing me, reducing me to a child in 3 sentences. "This," he said, tapping the paper, "is for your protection, women your age. You're vulnerable to bad decisions, bad investments. This just lets me, your father, handle the heavy lifting. It lets me protect you. All it requires is a little trust. We're a family. You just need to agree." I'm not sure I'm comfortable." The door swung open again, and Colt breezed in, his eyes scanning for food. He saw the document, my face, my father's thunderous expression, and he groaned. He had no time for subtlety. "Oh my God, are you seriously making this a thing?" he said, snagging a discarded shrimp from a prep tray. "Just sign the damn paper, Marin." I stared at him. "This doesn't concern you, Colt." "The hell it doesn't," he snapped. "That car out there? My future? That's what this is about. It's about family assets. You're part of the family, right? So sign it. It's not like you need that money. You've got your little editor job. I'm the one who needs the image. I'm the one with the potential. Just do it so we can eat." He said it. He said the quiet part out loud. "I need the image." I was cornered, the 3 of them. A wall of escalating pressure, the sweet poison, the rational condescension, and the blunt force greed. My heart was hammering. This was the coercion. But it was private. It was 3 against 1. If I fought back now, they would crush me here. I needed witnesses. I needed the stage they had already set. I took a deep breath. I looked at the paper. Then I looked up, and I smiled. A small, accommodating, daughterly smile. "You're right," I said. The relief in the room was instantaneous. Gregory's hand on my shoulder relaxed. Valerie's smile became genuine. Colt rolled his eyes, victorious. "Wow," I said, picking up the document and folding it carefully. This is a big step. Of course I want to help the family." I looked at my father. "This is a big financial decision. And Dad, you always taught me to treat big decisions with respect, to never sign anything without reading it properly." His brow furrowed. "Marin, I told you." "And I think," I continued, my voice bright, "that a decision this important, this symbolic, shouldn't be hidden in a pantry. It's not a formality. It's an honor. You said yourself you had a family announcement after dessert. Let's do it then. In front of everyone. In front of your partners. We can sign it right at the table. It'll be my contribution to the announcement. A real show of family unity. I had them. I had used their own language against them. Family unity. Image. How could they refuse a public coronation of their own power? Valerie's face froze. This was not the plan. She wanted it done quietly. Before the meal. Gregory looked trapped. He could not. In front of Colt. Object to me, honoring him in public. To do so would admit that the whole thing was shady. That's not really necessary. Marin, Gregory said, trying to recover. Oh, but I think it is, I insisted, my smile wide and brittle. A moment like this? I want to do it right, after dessert. I'll hold on to this until then, so I can read it one more time, to fully appreciate it. I slipped the document into my blazer pocket. They were furious. I could see it in the tightening of Valerie's jaw, and the sudden, cold stillness in my father's eyes. I had failed the test. I had delayed the execution, but they were trapped by their own performance. They nodded, stiffly. Fine, Gregory said. His voice clipped. After dessert. He and Colt left, but Valerie lingered, her mask of gray slipping to reveal the cold fury beneath. Marin, she hissed, her voice dropping to a whisper. I am so deeply disappointed in you. I haven't had a full night's sleep in weeks. Weeks. Worrying about this house. Worrying about your father's health. The stress he is under. I truly thought you cared about this family. About what we have built. He is killing himself to give Colt a future. And you want to make a scene. It was a perfectly executed guilt trip. His stress, his choices, his reckless spending. All of it was now my burden. My fault. She swept out. I stood there for a moment, my heart beating a steady, cold rhythm. I had my proof of coercion. Now I just needed to document it. A few minutes later, just before we were called to the table, my father found me. He cornered me near the study, away from the chatter. The rational father was gone. This was the man who had demanded $4,000 for his son's insurance. I don't know what game you think you're playing, he growled, his face inches from mine, his grip on my arm tight enough to bruise. But our partners are in that dining room. The Aldens are in that dining room. If you embarrass me, if you make this family look anything less than 100% united, you will regret it. You will not ruin this for me. You will sign that paper, and you will smile. Do you understand me? It was a raw threat, the final piece. I pulled my arm away. I understand we're holding dinner, I said, my voice shaking only slightly. As he turned to greet his guests, I moved. First, I went to my purse, which I'd left in the guest coat closet. I took out my own 2 pens, high-quality archival ink. I zipped them into the secure inner pocket of my bag. I would not be handed a pen. I would not sign anything I did not provide. Second, I went to the small, downstairs bathroom and locked the door. The sound of the fan whirring on was a small comfort. I took the digital audio recorder from my satchel. It was tiny, no bigger than a stick of gum. I clicked the small switch. A tiny red light blinked once, then went dark. It was recording. I slipped it into my blazer pocket, the one that held the folded document, concealed by my pocket square. My grandfather's voice echoed in my head. Let it buy your voice. Third, I walked through the kitchen, a picture of calm, nodding at the stressed catering staff. I went to the side door, the one leading to the dark, snow-covered terrace. I looked at the deadbolt. It was unlocked. I knew my exit, not to run, but to escape and protect the evidence, to get to my car, lock the doors, and upload the file. Finally, I stood by the conservatory window, looking out at the darkness. I pulled out my personal phone. I opened a new text message to the number I had long since memorized, Dax Morell's office line. The message was simple, the code we had agreed upon. Phase 2 begins tonight. 9 p.m. check-in remains active. I hit send. There was no turning back. I was not canceling the failsafe. I was letting the timer run. A new, profound calm settled onto my shoulders. The gnawing anxiety that had lived in my stomach for a decade was gone. In its place was a cold, sharp, and exhilarating focus. I was no longer playing defense. I was no longer the pawn. I had just set the terms of engagement. Valerie glided to the head of the room, tapping a crystal glass with a silver spoon. The chiming sound cut through the air. "If everyone could please find their seats," she announced, her smile dazzling. "Dinner is served." I turned from the window and walked toward my seat. The conservatory was a cage made of glass and light. Outside, the Illinois winter pressed against the panes, a deep, velvety blue darkness where the snow was just visible. Inside, it was a bubble of forced, tropical warmth. Tall, mushroom-shaped outdoor heaters glowed a cherry red just beyond the glass, casting undulating, hellish reflections that danced with the dozens of candle flames on the table. In the center of it all, presented on a silver platter so large it was absurd, was the turkey. It was a monstrous bird, roasted to a deep, lacquered brown, glistening with its own rendered fat under the pinpoint spotlights Valerie had installed. It looked less like food and more like a sacrifice, an offering to the gods of prosperity, an image that my father and stepmother worshipped. My eyes drifted past the table, through the glass, to the driveway, and there it was. The supporting actor in tonight's drama, a luxury sedan, completely hidden under a taut silver tarp. It was parked just on the edge of the cobblestone path, angled for maximum visibility, and on its hood, impossibly large and vulgar, was a giant red bow, the kind you see in commercials. It was a prop, a declaration. Colt, sitting across from me, kept glancing toward it, a performance of feigned indifference that was betrayed by the smug, possessive smirk he could not quite contain. He was playing the part of the humble, grateful prodigy, astonished by his family's generosity. It was, perhaps, the worst acting I had ever seen. I turned my attention back to the room, to the real audience, Gregory's business partners. A trio of men in expensive, tight suits were flanking him. They were men whose smiles did not match their eyes. They laughed at my father's booming anecdotes, but their attention was restless. They wanted reassurances. They wanted to hear that their money was safe, that the Hollis venture was, in fact, reflowing and not circling the drain. And I felt their eyes on me. It was not a casual glance. It was an appraisal. One of them, a man named Henderson, leaned toward his colleague and murmured something behind his hand. His gaze fixed on me as I took a sip of water. I did not need to hear the words. I knew what I was. I was the untapped resource. I was the quiet, pliable daughter with the little job who could be convinced, through family, to be the solution. I was the soft asset they were counting on to backstop my father's reckless ambition. Valerie's seating chart was a work of strategic genius. Gregory, of course, sat at his end of the table, the patriarch, the host, his back to the roaring fireplace, framed like a king. And at the other end, directly opposite him, was the empty chair. Valerie had placed a single white rose on the charger plate, a touching memorial to my grandfather. Raymond Hollis. The guests murmured their approval at the sentiment. "So thoughtful," I heard a cousin whisper. "She thinks of everything." They saw a tribute. I saw a power play. Valerie had not left the chair empty to honor him. She had left it empty to demonstrate that his power was gone, that the seat was now hers to control, to bestow, to leave vacant as a sign of her own largesse. It was a vacuum, and she was controlling the space around it. "Marin, dear." The voice was sharp, cutting cleanly through the ambient noise. Mrs. Alden, our neighbor, a woman whose family money was so old it was practically geological. She was 70, with diamonds at her ears and a spine made of iron. She missed nothing. I turned. "Mrs. Alden, it's good to see you." She held my gaze for a beat too long. Her head tilted, her eyes, a pale, piercing blue, scanned my face. "You look different, child," she said. her voice dropping slightly. Not just older, different. Your eyes. A tiny chill went down my spine. Just tired from the drive, I suppose. She smiled, a thin, knowing expression. No, I do not think that is it at all. She turned back to her plate, the conversation over, leaving me feeling exposed. The dinner service began. Courses arrived and were cleared with silent, devastating efficiency. The conversation ebbed and flowed, a river of trivialities, and then, as the main course plates were settled, Colt decided it was his time. "Oh, hey, check this out," he announced, his voice slicing through the relative quiet. He pulled out his phone, already queued up. "My coach sent me my final recruiting reel. It's sick." He hit play. The tiny speakers blared some aggressive, bass-heavy track, and the table was forced to watch a 2-minute montage of Colt catching passes, running drills, and pointing triumphantly at the camera. Valerie watched with a look of shimmering, maternal pride. My father clapped a partner on the back. "The boy's a natural, isn't he? A real natural." I watched, my editor's eye automatically dissecting the footage. The cuts were fast, designed to hide the half-steps, the slightly fumbled catches, and then I saw the graphics, overlaid in a bold, collegiate font. 40-yard dash, 4.5 seconds, vertical leap, 38 inches. I nearly choked on my wine. I had been there, last summer, when he had run his official 40 for a scout. It was a 4.8, and that was being generous. His vertical was 33, on a good day. The numbers were lies, inflated, just like the value of my father's company, just like the necessity of his car, just like the sincerity of this entire evening. The reel was another piece of the grand, hollow illusion. The clip ended. Polite applause scattered around the table. "Looks impressive, son," one of the partners said, his voice flat. I looked down at my plate. The catering staff had just served the cranberry sauce. It was not the pale, jellied kind from a can. This was Valerie's signature. A deep, dark, artisanal compote, rich with whole berries. A server had spooned a perfect quenelle onto the rim of my white porcelain plate. It was a startling, shocking crimson, almost black at its center. It sat there, next to the pale turkey meat and the golden mashed potatoes, like a single, bloody exclamation point. This, I thought, this is the detail I will remember, the color of that stain on the white plate. The meal was drawing to a close. The tension in the room, which had been simmering beneath the surface, was beginning to rise. My father's partners were looking restless. The performance was dragging. They needed the finale. Gregory pushed his chair back slightly, a scraping sound on the stone floor. He picked up his wine glass. He tapped it, gently, with a silver knife. Ting, ting, ting. The sound was sharp, fragile. The conversations died, one by one. Every eye in the glass box turned to him. "Friends," he began, his voice radiating false warmth and complete command. "Valerie and I are so grateful to have you all here, to share our home, our table, our blessings." He paused, letting the weight of his blessings settle. "As you know, this family is entering a very exciting new chapter. Colt's future is brighter than ever," he beamed at his son. "And to that end, the family has a small declaration to make, a little announcement of our unity and our path forward." He held his glass high. "But that will be after dessert. For now, to family." To family. The room echoed. I drank. The wine was dry, acidic. As I set my glass down, I caught Valerie's eye from the far end of the table. She was not smiling. Her gaze was level, cold, and utterly clear. It was not a look of celebration. It was a signal. It was the sharp, pointed reminder from the pantry. It was the director cueing the executioner. "It is time. Do not fail." My hand, resting in my lap, was steady. I subtly pulled back the cuff of my blazer, just enough to see the face of my watch. The glowing hands read 8:20. My heart gave a single, hard kick. In exactly 40 minutes, At 9 p.m., my scheduled email to Dax Morrell would send the email with the activation code, the email with the link to the evidence, my dead man's switch. I had 40 minutes to let them complete their act of coercion, or I had 40 minutes to get to my phone, log in, and cancel the send. The 9 p.m. check-in, Plan B, it was armed, it was waiting. The timer was running. I looked around the room. The guests had resumed their chatter, but the energy had shifted. The air was buzzing, expectant. The storm was no longer on the horizon. It was here. It was in the room, pressing against the glass, waiting for the first crack. The sound of 20 sets of heavy, heirloom silver knives and forks touching porcelain plates, scraping lightly, picking at the remnants of the meal, was the only other sound. It was a chorus of tiny, sharp chimes, a discordant bell, heralding what was to come. My gaze drifted, once more, to the end of the table, to the empty chair, the single white rose, the memorial. Everyone in this room thought it was a symbol of the past, a quiet, sentimental nod to a man who was gone. Only I knew the truth. It was not a memorial, it was a trap. It was the seat of judgment, held for a man who had seen all of this coming. And as I sat there, the recorder in my pocket quietly documenting the ambient hum, I knew I was not the one who was about to be caught. The dessert plates were cleared. Tiny, exquisite pumpkin cheesecakes in martini glasses, the sugar, combined with the wine, had made the room loud and warm. The guests were laughing, flushed with food and alcohol. My father's partners looked, for the first time, genuinely relaxed. This was the moment Gregory had been waiting for, the peak of the evening. He stood again, raising his hands in a benevolent, silencing gesture. The room quieted, expectant. "Thank you, he boomed, his voice resonating with the false sincerity of a practiced public speaker. "It does my heart good to have you all here, to see our family, our friends, all together." He paused, letting his gaze sweep the room. He was building the moment. "I mentioned earlier that this family is on the cusp of a wonderful new chapter and a bright future," he continued, his voice dropping into a more serious, man-to-man register. "Needs a strong foundation, it needs stability, it needs commitment." His eyes found mine. They were not the eyes of a father. They were the eyes of a CEO about to close a hostile negotiation. The smile was fixed, but the message was a cold, hard command. "Do not fail me." "Valerie," he said, opening his hand. Valerie stood, a vision of supportive grace. She picked up a single, crisp, cream-colored envelope from the sideboard. It was the same one from the pantry. She walked it over to me, her steps silent on the stone floor. She did not hand it to me. She placed it on the table, just to the left of my water glass. "We have a small symbolic document," she said, her voice just loud enough for the whole table to hear. "A representation of our family's complete unity, a little piece of paper to formalize our next big step." She looked at me, her smile a perfect painted line. "Marin, darling." This was it, the public execution. The pen was not offered, but I knew it was in her pocket, waiting. As if on cue, a sudden burst of cold air and excited whoops came from the side door. Colt! He had slipped out during my father's speech. Now, he was standing in the open doorway, grinning, pulling at the giant silver tarp on the car in the driveway. "All right, Dad, is it time?" he yelled. Gregory laughed, a full-throated, manufactured sound. "It's time, son." With a theatrical flourish, Colt ripped the tarp away. It revealed the car, a gleaming, midnight blue luxury sedan. The red bow on the hood looked obscene. A few of the guests, mostly Colt's younger cousins, cheered and applauded. "Oh, my word! Gregory!" Mrs. Alden exclaimed, though her tone was more surprised than impressed. Colt ran his hands over the hood, practically vibrating with entitlement. He looked from the car to the table, his eyes landing on me. He held out his hand, palm up, expectant. "Well," he shouted, his voice cracking with impatience. "The keys! Let's go!" The cheering died down. The applause sputtered. Every single person at that table, the partners, the neighbors, the family, turned to look at me. My father was beaming, a king bestowing a gift. Valerie was smiling, her hand resting on the back of my chair. Colt was waiting, his hand outstretched. I was trapped. I was the centerpiece, the bank, the key holder. The silence stretched. It became heavy, then awkward. The only sounds were the faint, high-pitched whistle of the outdoor heaters and a single, dry cough from one of my father's partners. I looked at Colt's expectant, demanding face. I looked at my father's hard, warning smile. I looked at the envelope on the table. Then, slowly, I picked up my napkin, dabbed my lips, and placed it on the table. "There are no keys coming from me," I said. My voice was not loud. It was not angry. It was perfectly level. But in that pressurized, silent room, it landed like a gunshot. The air did not just fall out of the room. It was sucked out, leaving a vacuum. Colt's hand froze, then slowly dropped. His face, which had been alight with triumph, contorted into a mask of pure childish confusion, which was quickly hardening into fury. Valerie's smile did not move, but her eyes went dead. She looked like a marble statue, beautiful and completely cold. My father's face drained of color. The jovial host vanished, and the threatened, desperate man I'd seen in the pantry took his place. His voice was a low, vicious growl, meant only for me. But in the silence, it carried. "Marin, do not embarrass this family." I turned to look at him. "I have no intention of embarrassing anyone. Dad, I'm just not going to lie." "This is not a game," he hissed. "No," I said, "it's not." I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer. I saw a flicker of hope in my father's eyes, thinking I was reaching for a pen. Instead, I took out the small, black digital recorder. I placed it on the white linen tablecloth, directly beside the cream-colored envelope. It was a stark, black rectangle on a sea of white. "I think," I said, my voice rising, clear and steady, addressing the whole table, "that it's time we were all honest, in front of everyone." The room erupted in whispers. Mrs. Alden put her wineglass down with a sharp click. My father's partners were no longer relaxed. They were bolt upright, their faces a mixture of shock and avid, horrified interest. "Marin!" Valerie's voice was a sharp, warning cry. She finally moved, her hand reaching for the recorder. I put my hand over it. "Don't!" She recoiled, as if I had burned her. Her face was a storm of panic. She tried to smile, to play it off for the guests. "Darling," she said, her voice trembling with forced, syrupy sweetness. "You're misunderstanding the entire situation. You're overwrought. It's the holiday. You're confused." "I'm not confused. Valerie," I said. I picked up the envelope. I did not open it. I held it up. "This isn't a symbolic document. It's a general power of attorney, a document that would grant my father, Gregory Hollis, complete and unmitigated control over all of my assets, specified and unspecified, inherited or otherwise acquired." A gasp came from my aunt. My father looked like he was going to be sick. "What assets?" Colt finally spat out, his voice dripping with contempt. He stalked back into the room, the cold air clinging to him. "You don't have any assets. You're a glorified assistant. You live in a tiny apartment and you edit articles. You have nothing." "That's where you're wrong," I said. I felt a profound, cold calm, the calm of my grandfather. "I am the sole beneficiary of the Raymond Hollis Descendant Trust." The name Raymond Hollis silenced the whispers. Every eye went from me to the empty chair at the head of the table, as if he were sitting there. "That's a lie," Gregory choked out. That's not possible." "It is," I said. "It was established by him 5 years before his death and is managed by Northbridge Fiduciary. I am sure your partners," I said, nodding to the 3 pale men, "are familiar with them. They were Henderson's eyes widened, and he shot a look at my father that was pure ice. "The trust," I continued, "is locked, but my grandfather, who saw all of you so clearly, included a provision, Clause 4.1b, the hardship and coercion clause." I quoted the language Dax and I had rehearsed. "It allows for the immediate and full transfer of control to me, the beneficiary, in the event of undue financial pressure, emotional coercion, or physical threats used to extract funds, signatures, or leverage against the beneficiary's assets." I paused. "Which is exactly what you—" I looked at Valerie. "And you?" I looked at my father. "Did in the pantry not 1 hour ago, and which you?" I looked at Gregory again. "Did in the hallway just before dinner. It's all recorded. Right here." I tapped the small black device. My father stood up so fast his chair screeched backward and toppled over with a crash that made half the table jump. You bitch," he whispered, his face purple. "Gregory!" Valerie shrieked, panicked. Colt just laughed, a short, ugly, barking sound. "A trust? So what? You're just proving you're a selfish, crazy liar. You're trying to ruin my life because you're jealous." "I am not," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "A glorified assistant. I am the legal owner of that fund, and I am the legal owner of my own freedom. This document." I tore the envelope, and the power of attorney inside it, in half. "Is null and void, and any attempt to create another one, any signature that is not mine, verified by me, will be considered fraud and prosecuted as such." I dropped the torn pieces onto the table. They landed next to the dark red stain of the cranberry sauce. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a building that has just had its foundation pulled out. My father was breathing hard. Valerie was white. Her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were prominent. Colt looked as if I had just slapped him. Then, from the side of the table, a new voice, a quiet, dry, and deeply authoritative one. It was Mr. Alden, Mrs. Alden's husband. He was a retired contracts attorney, a man known for his sharp mind and sharper tongue. He was not looking at me. He was looking at my father, his expression one of profound, clinical distaste. He leaned over to his wife and whispered, just loud enough for the entire silent table to hear. "Well, he's finished. The girl is 100%, unequivocally, legally correct." Mr. Alden's words hung in the air. A final, damning judgment. Legally correct. My father stood by his overturned chair, his face a mottled, terrifying shade of purple. He was a statue of impotent rage. Colt was frozen, his mouth half open, his brain visibly failing to process a reality where he was not the center of the universe. The guests were a tableau of shock, their faces pale in the candlelight. And then, Valerie moved. The spell was broken. She was the hostess, the curator, the one who managed things, and this was a situation that needed to be managed. She did not glide. She did not walk. She advanced. She moved from her end of the table, her steps short and hard on the stone floor, her progress a terrifying, silent march. She wove through the stunned guests, her eyes locked on me. The perfect, smiling mask was gone, burned away by my words. What was left was raw, primal, and cornered. She stopped directly in front of my chair. She was so close I could smell the expensive, floral notes of her perfume, a scent now mingled with the acidic odor of her fury. She leaned down, her face inches from mine, and the words she spoke were not for the table, but they were recorded by the small, black device sitting between us. Her voice was not a shout. It was a low, concentrated hiss, vibrating with a pressure that had finally, catastrophically broken its container. "You," she whispered, her teeth clenched so hard her jaw muscles bunched. "You don't know what you are doing." And that's when it came. It was not a shove. It was not a clumsy, drunken swing. It was a slap, a strike. It was precise, targeted, and shockingly fast. Her arm, honed by years of tennis and Pilates, moved in a short, brutal arc. The sound was not loud. It was a sharp, flat crack. It was the sound of skin on skin, a sound so intimate and so violent it seemed to suck all the other noise from the room. In the dead silence that followed, a single, abandoned dessert fork, knocked from the edge of a plate by a guest's recoiling hand, clattered onto a porcelain charger. The chime of metal on ceramic rang through the glass room like a bell, a funeral bell for the Hollis family image. Time seemed to slow down. I felt the impact as a sudden, blooming explosion of heat. My head was snapped to the side, my hair flying across my face. The sting was immediate, 1,000 tiny needles driving into my skin. From my cheekbone down to my jaw, my eyes watered, a purely physical reaction. But I did not blink. I did not move. I did not flinch. I did not raise my hand to strike back. I simply sat there, absorbing the shock, letting the silence stretch. I turned my head back, slowly, to face her. And I took a deep, steady breath. I could feel the blood rushing to my cheek, the skin already beginning to throb, to swell. I raised my own hand, not in anger, but in a slow, deliberate gesture of assessment. I laid my palm flat against the burning mark. It was hot. It was real. It was evidence. My father, Gregory, finally broke from his paralysis. The sight of the slap, of the physical violence, seemed to animate him. "You!" he roared, surging forward. He was not coming to my defense. He was coming to finish it. His hand was raised, curled into a fist, moving to grab my arm, to grab me. He stopped. He froze, mid-lunge, his arm still in the air. He stopped because the entire room had just lit up. Dozens of small, glowing rectangles were now held aloft. His partners, his cousins, Mrs. Alden, even one of the catering staff, standing horrified by the service door. Every single guest had their phone out, and every single phone was pointing directly at him, at Valerie, at me, the public stage. The audience he had so carefully curated had just become a wall of witnesses, all of them recording. The power had shifted. It was no longer a private, familial assault. It was a public spectacle. It was a crime. "Someone call 911. The voice was Mrs. Alden's. It was not a whisper. It was a command, clear, loud, and ringing with absolute, ironclad authority. She was not looking at me. She was looking at Valerie, her face a mask of cold, aristocratic disgust. "That was not a family dispute," she declared, her voice cutting through the whispers. "That was a battery. That is assault on an adult." The words, battery, assault, 911, they were legal. They were final. They were not part of the Hollis family script. Colt, who had been watching with a sort of horrified, adrenalized confusion, physically recoiled. He took a half step back, away from the table, away from his mother. It was not the recoil of remorse. It was the primitive, animal instinct of someone who finally, for the first time in his insulated life, recognized the scent of real, immediate consequences. He looked at the phones, at his pale-faced mother, at his raging father, and he understood that the game was over. I did not cry. Tears were what they expected. Tears were what they fed on. Tears were weakness, and I was done being weak. I lowered my hand from my cheek. I calmly reached into my other blazer pocket and pulled out my personal cell phone. I unlocked it with my thumb. I opened the camera application. I clicked the icon to reverse the view. I held the phone up, my hand perfectly steady, and angled it at my own face. The screen showed me what I could only feel. A bright, angry, perfect handprint, already swelling, the outline of 5 fingers stark against my pale skin. The flash was automatic and blinding. It fired with a sharp click pop, illuminating the room in a cold, white light, capturing the red mark in perfect, high-resolution clarity. Then, I calmly placed my phone on the table, and with one finger, I turned the small, black digital recorder so that its tiny, sensitive microphone was pointing directly at my stepmother. A guest. I recognized his voice. It was Henderson, my father's primary partner, whispered to his wife, but the whisper was loud in the silence. "It's over," he breathed. "My God, in front of a crowd like this? She's finished them. We're finished." Valerie was panting. Her chest was heaving, her eyes wide and wild with panic. The predator had become the prey, and she could feel the cage walls closing in. She looked at the phones, at the guests, at her husband, and she tried, one last, desperate time, to reclaim the narrative. She forced her lips into a smile. It was a grotesque, terrifying grimace, a rictus of pure terror stretching her skin. "Please," she gasped, her voice high and thin, cracking with the strain. "Please, everyone, this is just a terrible misunderstanding. A family matter." She laughed, a short, hysterical bark. "Marin is just, she's upset. She's overwrought. We can handle this. Put your phones down, please." I looked at her, the heat on my cheek a throbbing beacon of the truth. "A misunderstanding," I said. My voice was cold. It was calm. It cut through her hysteria like a blade of ice. "Misunderstandings don't leave handprints." As the last word left my mouth, another sound joined the suffocating silence. It was faint at first, distant, a high, two-tone wail, rising and falling, cutting through the winter night. Whoop, 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 whoop. It was growing louder. It was not a fire truck. It was not an ambulance. It was the unmistakable sound of a police patrol car. Someone had already called. Mrs. Alden, I was certain, had been texting 911 from the moment Valerie started her advance. The siren was getting closer. It was turning onto our street. I looked at my father, who was now as pale as the linen tablecloth. I looked at Valerie, who looked as if she might faint. This was not the climax. This was not the end. This was just the overture. The professionals were arriving to read the report I had just finished writing. The flashing blue and red lights painted the conservatory in grotesque, pulsing strokes. They strobe-lit the scene, the overturned chair, the shattered remains of the dessert, the pale, horrified faces of the guests, and Valerie, frozen in place, her hands still raised slightly, as if she were a statue commemorating her own downfall. The sharp, demanding ring of the doorbell cut through the silence. No one moved. It rang again, longer this time. Finally, a terrified member of the catering staff, her face white, scurried from the kitchen and opened the front door. 2 Lakefield police officers stepped inside. They were not the local, friendly, officer-friendly types. They were tall, professional, and their presence, in their dark, functional uniforms, instantly transformed the opulent foyer from a party space into a potential crime scene. "We received a 911 call reporting a domestic disturbance, an assault," the taller officer stated, his voice a calm, deep baritone that carried easily into the conservatory. He walked in, his partner just behind him, his eyes scanning, cataloging. He saw the overturned chair. He saw the table of stunned, silent people, many with phones still clutched in their hands, and his gaze landed, finally and firmly, on me. He took in my face, the bright, angry handprint that was now impossible to hide. "Okay," he said, his voice all business. "Who is the affected party here? And who are the witnesses?" I stood up. My legs were shaky, but my voice was not. "I am, officer," I said. "My name is Marin Hollis. A few moments ago, my stepmother, Valerie Hollis," I gestured to Valerie, who seemed to have shrunk, "assaulted me." "It was a misunderstanding," Valerie cried, her voice high and reedy. "She's hysterical. We were just arguing." The officer held up a hand, a simple, silencing gesture. He did not even look at her. His focus remained on me. "Ma'am, are you injured? Do you require medical attention?" "I do not need an ambulance," I said, my voice gaining strength. "But I absolutely require an incident report. The assault was the climax of a sustained attempt at financial coercion, and I wish to press charges." "That is a slanderous lie," Gregory roared. Finally finding his voice, he stormed forward, his face mottled with rage, trying to re-establish his dominance through sheer volume. "This is a private family matter. I am the head of this house, and I—" The second, younger officer moved to intercept him, placing a firm hand on his chest. "Sir, I need you to stay back. Right now. You will have a chance to speak. Let her finish." Gregory stopped, sputtering, trapped between his rage and the sudden, immovable wall of the law. "I have evidence, officer." I continued. I picked up my phone, my movements deliberate. I showed him the high-resolution photo of my cheek. He looked at it, then at my face. He nodded, grimly. "That was taken 2 minutes ago." I tapped the screen, opening the secure folder Dax Morrell had instructed me to prepare. This is a series of encrypted emails from my legal counsel, detailing my status as the sole beneficiary of a trust. This, I tapped again, is the specific hardship and coercion clause I was reading to the table when she struck me, and this, I pointed to the small black rectangle still sitting on the tablecloth, is a digital audio recorder. It is still on. It has been recording for the last hour. It has captured the initial threats of coercion from my father and stepmother in the pantry, my father's subsequent threats in the hallway, and the entire conversation here at the table, including the assault itself. The officer's eyebrows shot up. He looked at the recorder, then at me, with a new, profound respect. "And who witnessed this assault?" he asked, scanning the room. There was a terrible, long silence as the guests looked at each other, none of them wanting to be the first to cross Gregory Hollis. "I did." "Mrs. Alden said, her voice like a steel blade. She stood up. "My husband and I, and every single person at this table, Mrs. Hollis walked up to Ms. Hollis, threatened her, and then struck her, unprovoked. It was, as she said, battery." "She was attacking my family!" Colt suddenly yelled from the corner, finding a shred of misplaced loyalty. "She was stating her legal rights," Mr. Alden countered, his dry voice cutting Colt off at the knees. "We heard every word." "Officer," a new nervous voice said. It was Henderson, my father's partner. He was pale and sweating, but he was holding his phone up as if it were a shield. I also have a video. My phone it was recording. I have the entire incident, the slap, on video." The officer looked at him. "Thank you, sir. We will require a copy of that for your statement." Gregory's entire body seemed to deflate. Video, audio, a dozen witnesses. He tried one last time, his voice shifting from a roar to a desperate, placating purr. "Officer, Kaylin, isn't it? I know you're chief of police. We play golf. Surely, you understand. This is my daughter. She's high-strung. It's a family argument that just got a little emotional. It's Thanksgiving." Valerie, seeing the opening, rushed to his side. Yes, exactly. A family matter. We are all just so stressed. We can handle this ourselves, internally. There is absolutely no need for this. We can just forget this whole awful thing." Officer Kalin looked at them, his face impassive. He was not impressed by the golf story. He was not moved by Valerie's desperation. "Mr. and Mrs. Hollis," he said, his voice flat and final. This stopped being a family matter when a 911 call was placed reporting an assault. And it certainly stopped being internal when your wife struck your daughter in front of 20 witnesses, several of whom were recording. He turned to his partner. "Separate them. I'll take Mrs. Hollis in the kitchen. You take Mr. Hollis in the study. We'll get Miss Hollis's statement first. Right here. The rest of you," he said to the room. "Please stay where you are. We will need a statement from everyone." The next hour was a blur of calm, meticulous procedure. I sat with the younger officer, recounting the events in precise chronological order: the pantry, the document, the threat, the public confrontation, The slap. I transferred the audio file and the video I had taken of my cheek to a secure police link. I emailed the copies of the trust documents. The officer, whose name was Novak, was thorough. You mentioned declining an ambulance, but I want to be clear on your options. You can file for an emergency protective order tonight. A judge will sign it. It would compel your stepmother and father to have no contact with you and to vacate this residence, or for you to be given a police escort to retrieve your belongings safely. Given the threats and the physical violence, I strongly recommend it. Yes, I said, my voice firm. That is exactly what I want. I am pressing full charges for assault and for the preceding attempts at criminal coercion. He nodded. Writing. Understood. He tore a small slip from his notebook and handed me a card. This is your incident report number, the case number. All further communication will reference this. A detective from the domestic violence unit will be in touch, likely tomorrow morning. I took the card. It was a solid, tangible object, proof. As he was finishing his notes, my personal phone, the one with the secure SIM, rang. I looked at the screen. It was not a number I knew, but the area code was for Chicago, Dax Morell's office. My heart gave a single, hard thump. It was 9:05. My Phase 2 text had been received. Excuse me, officer, I said. I must take this. It's the trust administrator. Officer Novak paused, his pen hovering. I answered the call and pressed the speaker button. Hello? Ms. Hollis, a crisp, dry voice said. It was Dax Morell. I am calling to confirm receipt of your Phase 2 signal, sent at 8:37 p.m. Am I correct in assuming the coercion event is active or has just occurred? From the study, I heard my father's voice, which had been a low, placating murmur, go dead silent. Yes, Mr. Morell, I said, my voice ringing in the quiet room. You are currently on speakerphone with Officer Novak of the Lakefield Police Department, who is taking my statement following an assault. Understood, Morell's voice came back, absolutely unfazed. Officer, for your report and for all present parties, my name is Dax Morell of Morell & Associates. I am the independent supervisor for the Raymond Hollis Descendant Trust. I am calling to confirm that, based on the activation of the hardship and coercion clause, via provable physical threat, which I am now documenting, Ms. Maren Hollis is, as of this moment, the sole and fully vested owner of said trust. All assets are transferred to her exclusive control, effective immediately. Any party attempting to interfere with those assets, including but not limited to Gregory Hollis or Valerie Hollis, will be met with immediate and severe legal action from my firm and from Northbridge Fiduciary. It was a kill shot, a clean, legal, devastating execution. From the study, I heard a low, choking sound. My father. Thank you, Mr. Morell, I said, my voice steady. I will be in touch with you tomorrow to discuss next steps. I look forward to it. Ms. Hollis, good evening. Officer? The line clicked. The guests, who had been giving their statements one by one, were now being allowed to leave. They filed out in silence, a funereal procession. They did not look at my father, who was now visible, slumped in a chair in his study, staring blankly at the wall. They did not look at Valerie, who was sitting at the kitchen island, weeping quietly. Their exit was a judgment, a silent, collective shunning. Henderson, my father's partner, was the last to leave. He stopped in the doorway of the conservatory and looked at me, then at my father. He just shook his head, his face a mask of cold fury and financial ruin. You're done, Gregory, he whispered, and then he was gone. The only one left, besides the police and the family, was Colt. He had been slumped in a chair, staring at his hands, his entire world having evaporated in the space of an hour. But as Officer Kalin and Officer Novak began packing their notebooks, his youthful, narcissistic rage finally found its target. He leaped to his feet, his chair scraping loudly. You! He screamed, his face contorted. He was not yelling at his mother. He was yelling at me. You did this. You planned this. You came here and you ruined everything. My car, my future. He was so consumed by his own loss that he did not care about the police. He kicked the leg of the heavy mahogany table, a childish, pointless act of violence. Colt! Officer Kalen's voice was a sharp, cracking whip. Sit down, now. Be quiet, or your next ride will be in the back of my car for interfering with a police investigation. Colt froze, his legs still in the air. The sudden, cold blast of real-world authority hit him like a physical blow. He stared, wide-eyed, then slowly, like a puppet with its strings cut. He slumped back into his chair, his face buried in his hands. I turned away from him. I did not want to see his pathetic, self-absorbed grief. My gaze drifted, as it had all night, to the far end of the table, to the empty chair, the single white rose, my grandfather's seat. A profound, extraordinary calm settled over me, the anxiety that had lived in my stomach for 20 years, the constant, grinding pressure to perform, to please, to be small. It was gone. It had been burned away by the slap and washed clean by the law. In the study, my father was on his phone, his back to the room. His voice was a low, desperate hiss. You need to get here, he was saying. I don't care what time it is. Alan, I need you here. I need backup. I need my goddamn backup. I looked at the small white incident card in my hand. I thought of Dax Morell's voice on the phone. I thought of the video, the audio, and the witnesses. My grandfather's voice echoed in my memory. See what others miss. My father was calling for help, still trying to fight. He didn't understand. The real backup had been put in place for me, years ago, and it had already won. The flashing lights from the 2 patrol cars in the driveway continued to sweep across the conservatory, a silent, rhythmic pulse of blue and red. Officer Kalen and Officer Novak were preparing to leave. Ms. Hollis, Officer Kalen said, his notebook now closed. We are going to wait in our vehicles at the end of the driveway. We suggest you gather your immediate belongings and leave. The temporary protective order will be served to your father and stepmother within the hour, compelling them to have no contact, but we advise you do not remain here. I understand, I said. Thank you, officer. Just as they turned to leave, the doorbell chimed again. It was not the frantic ring of a guest, but a clean, decisive, 2-note chime. Officer Novak, who was closest to the hall, looked at me. Are you expecting anyone else? No, I said, but my heart leaped. I looked at my watch. It was 9:15. He opened the door. A man in a dark blue, professional courier uniform stood on the threshold, a large, rigid, waterproof document envelope in his hand. He was completely unfazed by the 2 police officers in the foyer. I have a scheduled delivery for Marin Hollis. Signature required, he said, holding out a digital device. I'm Marin Hollis, I said, stepping forward. Right on time, ma'am, he said, glancing at his own device. Scheduled for 9:15 p.m. I signed my name. The line I drew on the screen was perfectly straight. He handed me the thick, heavy envelope and touched his cap. Have a good night. He turned and walked briskly back to his van. I closed the door, the heavy oak muffling the sound of the wailing sobs coming from Valerie in the kitchen. My father was still in the study, his voice a low, frantic murmur on the phone. Officer Kalen gave me a final, curious nod, then he and his partner let themselves out. I was alone in the house, save for the 3 broken people who had tried to break me. I walked back into the glass conservatory. The ruins of the feast were everywhere. The toppled chair, the torn napkin, the congealing food on 20 abandoned plates. I walked to the head of the table, to the empty chair that had been the center of the night's drama. I sat, not in my assigned seat, but in the one next to it, my grandfather's chair. I tore open the heavy-duty seal of the envelope. It was not from Dax Morell. It was from Northbridge Fiduciary. Inside were several sets of documents, each clipped separately. The first was a single sheet of heavy cream-colored bond paper, At the top, it read, Notice of Automatic Activation, Clause 4.1b. It detailed, in precise legal language, that the hardship and coercion clause was now active, but it was the bottom of the page that made my breath catch in my throat. It was a signature line, and it was already signed, Raymond Hollis. It was dated more than a year before he died. He had not just left me a key, he had pre-signed the activation, turning his own signature into a proximity mine. He had built the entire mechanism to be automatic. The event of coercion, the act of them pushing me, was the final piece of the trigger. My phone call to Dax was not a request. It was a confirmation that the trap had sprung. Behind that document was a thicker packet. It was a copy of a loan agreement, a second mortgage, taken out on this very house, dated just 3 months ago. The lender was a private equity firm with a predatory interest rate. The signatures at the bottom were clear, sharp, and desperate. Gregory Hollis, Valerie Hollis. This was the reflow. They had already leveraged the house to the brink to cover their debts, to fund this party, to secure the lease on Colt's car. The goodwill authorization they had tried to force on me was not to secure a new loan. It was to pledge my trust as collateral for the one they had already illegally taken. And then, there was the third document. It was a single page, a copy of an addendum to my father's and Valerie's own, separate inheritance from my grandfather. It was titled, The Ethical Beneficiary Clause. It stated, in language that was both elegant and brutal, that any beneficiary of the Raymond Hollis estate who was found to have used coercion, duress, or physical violence to manipulate another beneficiary would forfeit any and all remaining claims to their own inheritance. They had not just been gambling for my money, they had been gambling with theirs, and in the space of a single evening, they had lost it all. At the very bottom of the envelope, beneath the legal papers, was a small, personal note, folded in half. It was my grandfather's stationery. His spiky, familiar handwriting covered the page. Marin, it began, they are loud, and they are hungry. They will always believe they are entitled to what is yours. But they cannot have this. I built this for you. In the quiet, where they never bother to look. Remember that my empty chair is only temporary. When you truly need me to sit down, I will be there. This envelope, arriving at this exact moment, is me, sitting down. Now, go and use the voice I bought for you. I am so very proud of that voice. The tears I had refused to shed for the pain, I shed now for him. A single, hot tear that splashed onto the signature. I wiped it away, my hand trembling. My phone, resting on the table, lit up. A text message from Dax Morrell. TPO is filed. The judge on call signed off based on the police report and video evidence. Hearing is tomorrow at 9 a.m., but the temporary order is active immediately. They will be served within the hour. Do not engage. Leave the premises. A second notification popped up, right behind it, an email. From Northbridge Fiduciary. Subject, confirmation of transfer. Tranche 1. My fingers were shaking so hard I could barely open it. Dear Ms. Hollis, per the activation of Clause 4.1b, the initial disbursement tranche of $500,000 has been successfully transferred from the trust to your verified destination account, as per your pre-arranged instructions. Please confirm receipt at your convenience. A full audit of all trust assets will be forwarded to you within 2 business days. $500,000. It was sitting in my shadow account, the one I had opened with a P.O. box and a burner phone. It was real. It was mine. My phone began to ring. It was not Dax. It was a local number I did not recognize. Lakefield Realty. I hesitated, but my grandfather's words, "Use your voice," echoed in my head. I answered it. Hello? Is this Ms. Marin Hollis? A woman's voice asked. She sounded cautious, professional. This is she. Oh, thank goodness. Ms. Hollis, my name is Carol Baxter. From Lakefield Realty. We are the brokerage managing the refinancing for your father's property at your location. She paused, clearly uncomfortable. We've been trying to reach Mr. Gregory Hollis all day about the second mortgage agreement he and his wife signed last week. We were just running the final title check before funding, and, well, this is rather awkward. A flag came up, a very old one, from your grandfather, Mr. Raymond Hollis's estate. I gripped the phone. What flag? Well, it seems when Mr. Hollis passed, he left the primary deed for the property to his son, Gregory, but he also filed a secondary interest, a symbolic co-ownership, in your name. It's only a 2% stake, Ms. Hollis, but legally, it's a controlling stake. It specifies that this property cannot be sold, refinanced, or further leveraged against in any way, without your signature on the papers. I stood up. The room, the glass cage, seemed to tilt. Ms. Hollis? Carol said, her voice tinny. Are you there? The point is, that second mortgage, it's fraudulent. He doesn't have the authority to take it out. He didn't declare your interest. Ms. Hollis, that house isn't just his. Legally, it's yours, too. I looked across the destroyed room. My father was standing in the doorway of his study, watching me. He had finished his call for backup. His face was pale, defeated, but still defiant. Valerie had emerged from the kitchen, flanked by Officer Kalin, who was telling her about the TPO. Her face was a ruin of blotchy skin and smeared makeup. She's lying, she whispered, her voice raw, pointing at me. She's making it all up. That girl, she's a vindictive, conniving. Mrs. Hollis, Officer Kalin said, his voice completely devoid of patience. I strongly suggest you stop talking. Everything you say is being noted. The fragile, terrible silence was shattered by a sound from outside, a raw, guttural scream of pure, adolescent rage, followed by the sound of tearing fabric. Colt! He had stormed out of the conservatory. He was in the driveway, standing beside the gleaming midnight blue sedan. He was screaming, a high, thin, animal sound of pure loss. He grabbed the giant red bow from the hood and tore it in half. He kicked the side of the car, his boot making a dull thud against the metal. My car! He shrieked, his voice cracking. My car! You. He ruined it. She ruined it. He grabbed the remains of the silver tarp and began ripping it to shreds, his entire body convulsing with a tantrum. He was pulling at a piece of paper that had been taped to the windshield. He ripped it free. And even from inside, I could see what it was. It was not a purchase agreement. It was not a title. It was a 3-year lease agreement. They had not even bought the car. It was another prop, another illusion, rented for the night to secure the funding they needed from their partners, funded by the predatory loan they took out on a house they did not fully own. I hung up the phone. The whole glittering, fraudulent house of cards had just been blown over. The floor of the glass conservatory felt like it was pitching beneath my feet. They had built their world on my silence. They had set a public stage to corner me, to force my hand, to take what was mine, and in doing so, they had walked, one by one, into every single interlocking trap my grandfather had laid for them. They had not just pushed me against a wall. They had pushed me, finally, through the escape hatch he had been holding open for me all along. The front door, which the police had left slightly ajar, swung open. It was not another officer. It was not the lawyer, Alan, that my father had so desperately summoned. It was a young woman, dressed in a severe, perfectly tailored black suit. She carried a heavy-duty tripod and a large, high-resolution laptop. She moved with an air of absolute, unhurried purpose, walking past my father's slack-jawed, confused expression, past the police officers, and directly into the conservatory. She did not ask for permission. She walked to the head of the table, to the empty chair. With deft, practiced motions, she set up the tripod. She mounted the laptop, opened it, and aimed the screen at the room. She tapped the trackpad, and the screen, which had been black, flickered to life. A video call was connecting, and then he was there. My grandfather, Raymond Hollis. He was not a ghost. He was not a memory. He was live, rendered in high-definition video, his sharp, intelligent eyes seeming to take in the entire, ruined scene. He was sitting in a leather-backed chair, the logo of Northbridge Fiduciary visible on the wall behind him. He looked, impossibly, like he was about to run a board meeting. The legal assistant, her work done, stepped back. "Mr. Raymond Hollis," she announced to the silent room, "testifying via secure, legally binding video affidavit." My father took a step forward, his face a mask of disbelief. "Raymond, this is a mockery, a deepfake. This isn't... You're dead." "I am." My grandfather's voice boomed from the speakers. It was his voice, full of dry wit and iron, which makes my testimony all the more reliable. "Gregory, I've been waiting for this meeting." The legal assistant, on cue, respectfully adjusted the laptop, pushing it forward so that it rested in the actual seat of the empty chair. "I promised I would sit," my grandfather said, his gaze sweeping the room. "Thank you all for waiting." He looked down at a paper in his hands, the one I had just read. "I am here, live, to confirm the activation of 2 provisions of my will, triggered tonight by the actions of Gregory Hollis and Valerie Hollis. The first," he said, his voice hardening, "is the ethical beneficiary clause. It states," and here he read, his voice slow and damning, "that any beneficiary who utilizes physical violence or undue coercion against another beneficiary, specifically Maren Hollis, shall be immediately and permanently disinherited from any and all funds, properties, and assets remaining in the Raymond Hollis Family Trust." Valerie let out a low, strangled moan. She knew exactly which accounts that clause applied to. It was her entire safety net. "Secondly," my grandfather continued, "I confirm the activation of the dual power of attorney, which I signed the same day. My lawyers referred to it as the safe harbor provision, a 2%, controlling stake in the Lakefield property, registered to Maren Hollis. It was designed to ensure she could never be removed from her home, and more importantly, to prevent you, Gregory, from leveraging that home into oblivion. Which brings us to tonight." The legal assistant's phone, sitting on the table, chimed. She answered, putting it on speaker. "This is Northbridge Fiduciary. We have Ms. Carol Baxter from Lakefield Realty and a representative from the lending institution on the line. Ms. Baxter, please proceed." "Yes," Carol's voice was sharp. "We are notifying all parties that, due to Mr. Gregory Hollis's failure to declare Ms. Maren Hollis's controlling interest, the second mortgage agreement signed last week is fraudulent, null, and void. The bank," a new cold voice joined, "is formally withdrawing the line of credit, effective immediately." Gregory Hollis did not shout. He did not rage. He simply folded. He collapsed into a nearby chair, his face in his hands, his entire fraudulent world dissolving around him. Valerie stared at the screen, her expression one of utter hollow vacancy. Colt, who had been watching this from the doorway, his hands black with dirt and ripped fabric, finally snapped. He pointed a shaking finger at the screen, at the image of the grandfather he barely knew. "You!" he shrieked, his voice cracking. "You did this. You hated us. You always hated my dad. You gave her everything." "I gave your father every chance," Raymond's voice thundered, the first flash of anger I had ever heard from him. "I gave him my name, this house, and opportunities he squandered, and he, and his wife, used it all to try and destroy the one person in this family who actually earned her keep. This video call, by the way, is being recorded by my lawyers. Thank you for your confession. Colt." The anger in his face subsided, and his gaze shifted, softening as it found me. He looked at me, at my swollen cheek, at the documents I held in my hand. "Maren," he said, his voice quiet, "for me alone. I left that money to buy your voice. I was never sure you would find it. But today, I hear it clearly, and it is louder than I ever could have hoped." I stood up, I felt the throb in my cheek, the solid weight of the incident card in my pocket, and the sudden, profound absence of fear. I looked at the ruins of my family. "I am filing the protective order," I announced, my voice clear and steady. "I am revoking any and all permissions, written or implied. I will not be responsible for a single dollar of debt incurred by Gregory or Valerie Hollis." I looked at the legal assistant. "Please notify Ms. Baxter at the realty office. As the 2% controlling partner, I am proposing that this house be sold immediately. Pay the original, legitimate mortgage, and pay any other lawful debts. My protected share, as defined by my grandfather's will, is to be placed in a separate, secure fund for my safety and my future. We can proceed by morning, Ms. Hollis," the assistant's phone replied. "We already have a buyer in waiting." Officer Kalin, who had watched this final, financial execution with a look of stunned awe, finally cleared his throat. He stepped forward, closing his notebook. "We are done here, Mrs. Hollis. You will be served with a summons to appear tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. for the protective order hearing. Mr. Hollis, you as well." He then looked at Colt, who was slumped against the wall, defeated. "And sir," the officer said, "that smartphone you were using? My partner witnessed you filming Ms. Hollis during the assault, not just the car. We are taking it as evidence of your intent to create a smear campaign. Please hand it over." Colt's head snapped up, his last shred of control gone, but one look at the officer's face told him it was over. He handed over his phone. The few remaining guests, the Aldens, who had stayed as silent witnesses, now moved. Mr. Alden simply nodded at me, a look of profound respect. Mrs. Alden walked over and, ignoring everyone else, took my hand. Her grip was firm. "You are not alone, child," she said, before she and her husband turned and left the house of cards. On the screen, my grandfather looked at the scene one last time. "This Thanksgiving party," he said, his voice a final, cutting epitaph, "was not to praise a spoiled boy. It was to remind the adults in this room of the rules and the consequences." The screen went black. The legal assistant quietly folded the tripod, closed the laptop, gave me a curt, professional nod, and walked out. The empty chair was, finally, just an empty chair. I did not look at them again. I did not look at my father, a broken man in his ruined study. I did not look at Valerie, who was being quietly instructed by the other officer. I did not look at Colt, who was staring at his own empty hands. I walked to the table. I picked up my little black recorder. I carefully folded my grandfather's letter and placed it, and the other documents, into my satchel. I turned my back on them all and walked out of the conservatory, through the silent kitchen, and out the side door into the cold, clean night. A light, cleansing snow had begun to fall, dusting the courtyard, covering the tracks of the police cars and the courier van. I stood on the driveway for a moment, the cold air a blessed relief on my hot cheek. I pulled out my work phone and dialed my editor at Hearth and Hallow Media. "Jessica," I said, my voice perfectly clear, "I need to take a short leave of absence, effective immediately." I paused, listening. "Yes, I'm fine. Actually, I'm better than fine. I have a long story I need to write." "No," I said, watching the snow fall on the roof of the glass box. "It's not for revenge. It's to show the way." I hung up and walked to my car. I got in, locked the doors, and started the engine. The heater hummed to life. In the rearview mirror, I could see the house, the lights, the scene of my entire former life. I put the car in reverse and pulled onto the street. As I drove away, the house faded from the mirror, replaced by the dark, open road. I looked at my own reflection in the glass. My face was bright. It was calm. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are all listening from. So please drop a comment below and let's connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories. Give this video a like and support us by hitting that hype button so more people can hear this story.